Hi, I'm Miles Goldsmith, and this is my podcast, Game Design Hour, where I interview the people behind the video games you love. On today's episode, I interviewed Zwi Zausch about his work on the video game Dorfromantik. Before we get into today's interview, I want to let you know about today's sponsor, Hoffman's Woodstuffs. They specialize in the design and fabrication of custom furniture made from reclaimed or sustainably sourced hardwoods. They also make custom goods and gifts for any occasion. You can find them on Instagram at Hoffman's Woodstuffs, or you can find their website using the link in the description. Stick around until the end of the episode to find out how you can get 20% off your next order. Let's get into the interview.
Hi.
Hi. When did you first realize you wanted to work in the video game industry?
Well, my dad was a cameraman, so he worked in movies and documentaries. And from an early age, I wanted to work in the movie business, actually. And then I think it was around, in Germany we have a different school system than in the US. So it was towards the end of school when I realized that I find games and how they are made super interesting. And I just started researching if it's actually possible to study game design somewhere here in Germany. And yeah, it's possible. I found a school where you could study it without huge private fees. So we have certain schools here in Germany which are funded by the state. And then I applied directly after finishing school, but I didn't get accepted. So my plan B was to work in movies, and I had an apprenticeship, a 3-year apprenticeship in movie editing. And after that, I reapplied for game design, and then it worked. I kind of realized that I wanted to make games while playing Mass Effect 2. In case you know the game. It's kind of a classic now, I guess.
After going to that game design program, how did you first get into the industry?
Actually, Dorfromantik is our first game. So it's personally for me, it's my first endeavor into the industry in a way. But I worked in a VFX company for around a year. It was like an internship during my studies for game design. And I kind of wanted to find something that combines my movie experience with game design and 3D and stuff like that. So that's why I applied there. And that was actually my only other experience in the game design industry before making Dorfromantik. And then us four as a team, 2 of us released a game before, which was not that successful, but they kind of brought some experience with them, of course, and then the 4 of us we tried it again, or for some of us for the first time.
How did the idea for Dorfromantik first originate?
We at first we had the plan to kind of find an approach towards what would the first project for us be like, and we decided early on that we wanted to work on a game for 1 year and then release it and then focus on a new game maybe. And so we started to create lots of different prototypes at first. I think we created 8 prototypes in about a month. While we had this prototyping phase, there was the Ludo Dare game jam. It was, I think, number 46 in early 2020. And we had already founded our company and had already started to study in the master's degree of the same university, also master's degree in game design. So we as a team were already kind of working together, founding the company and trying to start the whole project in a way. But yeah, the first part was doing these prototypes. And we took part in this Ludo Dare 46. And during this game jam, we created the prototype for Dorfromantik. That was, I think, 3 days for the basic or like the old school version. It's still on itch.io. I can send you a link later. This was kind of the start of everything. After finishing these 8 prototypes, we gave them to friends and kind of started to pick 3 of these, which we deemed feasible as a first project. I mean, we were a team of 4 people who didn't really work together in this constellation before. So for us, it was the first time we worked in exactly this constellation, even though we studied together in the bachelor's degree before. We always were in different teams before. And so we wanted to pick a game that felt not too complex and something which didn't really have such a huge scope. So we could be sure that we could finish the game without being super stressed about everything, or having huge technical problems maybe, or having problems in the team. So we kind of try to choose the game which in a way fell into a perceived comfort zone. After we picked 3 of those prototypes, we decided let's continue with Dorfromantik, because that felt like the perfect game for this first project.
Do you remember how you guys placed in Ludo Dare?
No, I don't remember. But we didn't place in the top 10 or 20 or something. But we placed not that low either. Mm-hmm. And there were a few YouTubers who already showcased the game early on. And this also was kind of an eye-opener for us, because they were like, yeah, it's so chill and it's a really cool game. It pushes all my buttons and everything. And so the feedback for this prototype was so positive, that it really gave us lots of motivation to continue with this idea.
What was it like working on a video game during the pandemic?
That's a huge thing, of course. It's a big problem for many developers, I guess. We were used to working in small teams, but usually, of course, in person. Mm-hmm. And while we were studying at university, we always had one big game project per semester. And that was usually working on the game 24/7 in the small team together in the university. So lots of processes and workflows were very different from what we had to come up with during the pandemic, of course. As we don't have a studio, we all work from home. At the beginning, we thought we could work in the university because they gave us rooms to work in. But then the pandemic hit and we weren't allowed to go there. So we had to quickly come up with a way of kind of virtualizing this process we were used to. And what we actually did and still do now is we work in a Skype call for the whole workday. So it's like sitting next to each other in a way. So you can always talk to teammates. You can always see them in a way. So it's like a little bit more personal. And then we use a tool which is called Miro. And that's like a in-browser virtual whiteboard tool where you can cooperatively work on designs. You can paint things or draw things. You can type texts. You can share photos and paint on them, screenshots and so on. So it's a tool where we can really easily work on ideas together, and it's nearly as if we're sitting next to each other and we're working on things on a table or on a pinboard or something. So yeah, that was really important for us to kind of copy these analog processes and find a digital replacement. And still, I would say it's still not optimal. I mean, we found ways to make it work and it works really well. But we prefer working in person with each other. And we hope that in a few months, maybe it's possible again. But let's see.
How many people worked on Dorfromantik?
Dorfromantik was made by 4 developers. We are 2 programmers. One of them is more focused on game design and the big programming tasks. The other one helps out in programming, is also a project manager for us. So he does lots of organizational tasks and also lots of the business decisions. Of course, we decide everything in a democratic way together, but he kind of is the one who goes into business talks and business meetings and so on, when the other ones don't have time. I'm the tech artist in a way, so I'm one of the 2 artists in the team, and I also do marketing and social media stuff. And yeah, I do mostly the tech art side of things, so shaders, and I try to create systems which work well for our artist Luca. He's doing mostly art and graphic design. He designed the project logo and the graphic assets for the game and the social media posts and so on. Yeah, and I'm also doing video stuff, of course, because that's what I learned before. So yeah, I made the trailers and so on.
What was playtesting like during the pandemic?
It was a bit frustrating, I would say. It's not like a huge problem for us because we have enough fellow students and friends in the industry we can ask to play the game and give us some feedback. But of course, we would have really liked to have like a party where everybody can play the game and you can talk about it and have a drink and have a good time with friends and so on. But that wasn't really possible. And now, since the game is out in early access, for us, it's really great to have this beta program on Steam, which I would also recommend to other developers if it's possible, if you have the resources, do it. Because when you have a certain amount of players who are very active in the community and actively playing the game, these are very honest and reliable playtesters too. So that's how we test most of the new updates and patches. And we hope that for the full version release next year, we can go to a more professional Q&A testing facility. But yeah, we will see how that works out and if that works out at all.
Were there any interesting ideas that ended up getting cut from the game that you think fans would be amused by?
There's like one cut thing that's a scarecrow, but that was only because the concept was not yet really worked out fully, and the design wasn't that good looking. There were a few weird bugs which are pretty funny. When we started implementing the trains, for example, when you placed a tile as a preview next to a train track, the train started to move on this tile, but you could still like take it away. And then the train was off the train track and was just driving around randomly in the world, which was pretty funny. But apart from that, no, there's no real cut content yet, because we're really adding things very carefully, and we usually iterate on everything for a long time until it works out well, and then we implement it into the game. So for now, I can't really think of anything.
Were there any big disagreements you and the team had, and how did you resolve it?
Maybe you could say there were disagreements, but there were no real arguments or anything like that. We, of course, have disagreements when we decide on how to create the UI, for example, or the menu, or what sort of mechanics to implement, what things to put aside. But that's just part of the process for us. We try to approach the game design process by putting aside our own ego, because in a way we are all artists and we are super passionate about what we do. And then, of course, you have a certain idea and you think it's a really good one, and you kind of get a little bit protective about it, maybe. But this is something we actively work on to not do at all. So we really talk about everything, we discuss things, we iterate, and at some point when 3 people in the team say, this is really not the right way to do it, or this is not the correct path to take, then the one person always says, that's fine, let's think about the game as a priority. The game should be good and the process should work well and fluently. So we really try not to get stuck at decision points. And one big discussion, for example, was the pricing. What price would we deem a fair price for the game, but also not too expensive, not too cheap? That's a really, really hard decision to make, and that took us quite a while to reach. I guess we kind of decided on an okay price in the end.
Sorry to pop in here, but I wanted to let you know about today's sponsor, Hoffman's Woodstuffs. They specialize in the design and fabrication of custom furniture made from reclaimed or sustainably sourced hardwoods. They also make custom goods and gifts for any occasion. If you want to check them out, you can click the link in the description to head on over to their website, or you can find their Instagram at Hoffman's Woodstuffs. Stick around until the end of the episode to find out how you can get 20% off your next order. Let's get back into the interview. What was the biggest design challenge you faced while working on Dorfromantik?
Well, we're still actively working on the game and are still working on mechanics and on the balancing. So I would say we are still solving some of the problems. The biggest problem so far was probably the readability / accessibility and understandability of the game. So one of our main design approaches and design pillars is actually to have a game that is very easy to grasp, very easy to understand for many, many players. And we had the experiences before in our study program to create games which are very complex in their mechanics and thus also difficult to explain, or maybe a little bit complicated. And we feel like this usually makes the first moments of experiencing a game unnecessarily frustrating for some players. So for us, it was very important to keep the game very simple and minimalistic in its approach. And the tutorial and how to communicate what the quests actually want from the players, that was something which we really had to dial in very carefully. So that was something we tweaked a lot. And having demo versions of the game or sharing early builds with the community or certain players really helped a lot because they were very critical of some parts. So, for example, they said, yeah, this quest, I really don't know what to do there. I can't understand the symbols, what they actually want from me. So we really tried to find a clearer approach and a way of communicating things even more clearly to the players. And this is what is one of the main problems we faced before. And then a second one was performance. Of course, having the game run well on many, many different systems is a huge task for a small team. I mean, imagine a team of 200, 300 people working on a game, then you can have a task force really focused on making the game run well and making it performant on low-end hardware too. But for indie games, this is a not that easily approachable task. It's a more difficult task to include in the development process because sometimes it's more about getting the game visually ready and playable. And then afterwards you realize, oh, if we want to have this run well on low-end systems, we need to change many of these things. And we approach the game design very modularly. So we can always tweak things and parts of the game, which works really well. But for the creative mode, we had to redesign a few systemic parts of the game and make it run better so that people can build big worlds too. Because before you had kind of this soft cap, so most players would kind of run into the game's difficulty at, let's say, 40,000 points. So only hardcore players would reach higher scores and build bigger worlds. So most players didn't really run into performance issues at some point because the game would just end. And now with the creative mode, we had to make sure that especially for low-end systems, big worlds would render well and run with at least 30 FPS. And so we had to rework several approaches of how all the small objects in the game are drawn on the screen. And that was challenging, definitely. Yeah, took a while to do. Yeah, but I feel like it was really worth it. And now the game runs better on most systems. I can't really say how much better because it really depends on the system, but on some low-end systems we tested on, the game runs like 2 to 3 times better now, which is great, of course.
What was your toughest day while working on Dorfromantik?
Tough as in exhausting, I would say, were the days before release, of course. That was very, 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 very challenging because working towards this early access release without being able to plan for a successful launch. I mean, you couldn't really be sure that the game would launch well. And for us, that was very important because we took a huge risk, of course, with funding our own company. And we always had the plan to make more games afterwards. But that was only possible if Dorfromantik would be a success. And if we could finance us and pay us to eat and to continue working on it for 1 or 2 years, or like continue as this company. So we were nervous and everything was a little bit tense, I would say. Yeah, and then just reaching this release day and finally hitting the release button and then kind of having to let go in a way. That was a hard thing in a way. But then the weeks afterwards, they got hard too, because having so much media coverage and being in many interviews and having to answer hundreds, thousands of emails, that was something we didn't really anticipate. So the months after release actually were pretty exhausting too, but more so emotionally because it was just a roller coaster ride of being super happy and having lots to do. So yeah, I don't want to complain. It was just exhausting, but that's kind of how it is, I guess. And then of course, when you work so closely with friends or colleagues, then sometimes you have something happening in the family or so on. Especially during the COVID pandemic, this was a little bit hard on us too, I guess, because we were afraid for family members. Some of our family members are older already. So yeah, that's something which is always on your mind, and you kind of have to put it aside and try to focus on your work.
How does some of the first concepts of the game differ from what you have now?
Yeah, well, this prototype I talked about before actually has a big difference to the final game now. You still place the hexagons and you have this tile stack of tiles, but you don't match up their edges. So the mechanic then was you just place down hexagons with, let's say, trees on them, and then all neighboring hexagons which have trees on them count as a group of hexagons with trees. And the game system counted these things a little bit differently. So you had the task of creating a group of houses with 60 houses. So you would have to place down enough tiles with houses on them. And it didn't really look at the edges. And after we kind of released this prototype and got lots of feedback from people, we really wanted to try to give the players the ability to rotate the tiles and to implement this new mechanic of having to match up the edges to create groups. And this is like the biggest difference, I would say, in the mechanics. And then, of course, at some point, we decided that the way we solved the to-do quests in the old prototype, you just had these small to-do lists in the top of the screen. We didn't really feel that that was an elegant way to do it, and we wanted to incorporate this more into the game world. And so we reiterated this quest approach and created these small speech bubbles which just hover over the tiles which you place. So you personally place the quests now. Yeah, these are mostly the big differences. And then, of course, we developed more quests, more special tiles, more biomes, and we evolved the visual style of the game too.
When did work first start on Dorfromantik?
I think we created the prototype in April 2020, but I'm not that sure at the moment. I think we really started production, as in focusing more on the core system and improving on this prototype, I think around a month later or something like that. Yeah.
Are there plans to add any new tiles or biomes in the future?
Definitely. Actually, right now we are working on more content for the game. So we are working on more quest types. We're working on more special tiles and more quest givers for the game. So there's definitely cool new stuff on the horizon, which improves the maybe the replayability and the diversity of the game. And yeah, we will bring more biomes, definitely. I cannot say when, but we definitely want to include more biomes.
Which part of the game did you spend the most time working on?
I'd say it's 50-50 focused on the programming side of things and the art side of things. But when you focus on game design especially, I would say a huge amount of time goes into balancing. We really try to keep the scope of the game small so that we can have lots of time which we can spend on making the game play well. So we want to keep it fun for everyone and not make it too frustrating, not make it too difficult, but not make it too easy. And these are things which are very carefully balanced. So this really takes up a lot of time. And as I said before, the accessibility of the game is also very important. So these are, I would say, the main focus points in our game design approach.
So I'm guessing fans of the game can expect to see many future updates?
Yes, well, the newest update was the creative mode. So it's available right now, and you can now build freely without having a tile stack limitation. And yeah, you can basically build an endless world as long as the hardware allows for it. Yeah, we are currently improving this creative mode of the game. So we are adding a few more possibilities. Right now you get like a pipette tool, so you can choose a tile which you already placed and put it back on top of the tile stack, so you can place copies of this tile. You can delete tiles which you don't like. So we are trying to add onto this mode and make it even more usable and more flexible for players. And then the next big update will be more content for the game. And then for the full release, we will probably have another big content update. These are the updates we kind of definitely want to bring. Afterwards, we can't really say how things will continue because we also want to look at bringing the game to different platforms.
When do you think the full release is going to be?
For now, we think about bringing it in the first half of 2022 and probably in Q1. But no, we don't have a more concrete date set yet.
Looking back now, what do you wish you could have done differently before the initial launch?
As a very young studio, I guess we definitely learned a lot about how to interact with the community. And this is something we mostly learned after the launch, because after the launch, we realized, we need to be more active and communicate more. So what really didn't work that well was we launched the game and then we worked tirelessly on answering questions which we got via mail from press and players and so on. But we weren't that active on the Steam community because we focused a lot on developing the game further and fixing bugs and bringing small patches and so on. But at some point in the Steam community, people thought we were taking a break, but we weren't. And so now we hired a community manager. So we have someone who's focused on communicating with the community. And also we have someone who supports us in marketing so that we don't have to focus on that on our own. Because if you're such a small team, we are lucky that we have so diverse skills that we can basically do everything we need ourselves. But when you really want to focus on one thing and need to concentrate on this part of development, then it's really hard to always switch around in different tasks. And so what I would say I wish we would have seen earlier is that maybe it would have been great to have someone for community management or community building a little bit earlier even, or someone who would have supported us in marketing a little bit earlier still. But in general, I have to say I'm very happy about how we did it, because, as I said before, it's our first project in this scope, and our first commercial release. And so I guess things could have gone much worse. So yeah, I'm also quite happy about how everything turns out.
What was the biggest lesson you learned from working on Dorfromantik?
Yeah, well, it's definitely that approaching game design minimalistically is a good idea when you start out. For us, it worked really well to not get lost in this very idealistic approach of what are things we really want to do and what is something which we think is super, super cool and super complex and super new and unique. Let's build the best, craziest game there ever was. I think overscoping is a huge problem in the indie industry. And I guess that from the games, we as consumers, I also see myself as a player, of course, and I also consume indie games. From all the releases we see and we hear about, many of these are the lucky ones, because it's only like the tip of the iceberg. Because there are so many thousands of projects which never get finished at all, and you never really hear about them because some approach was maybe flawed, or maybe the teamwork didn't work out. And the more complex a game gets, the more complex the production of the game gets, the more difficult the production gets, the more hurdles you have to overcome as a young, small, inexperienced team. And so I guess keeping things simple is a really important approach. And for us, that worked out really well. And this is the biggest thing I actually learned from working on Dorfromantik. Because I also worked on projects myself before, like on solo projects. And I can tell you, none of these are finished because I mostly overscoped and had too much things to work on. And then you kind of really don't even know where to begin or where to focus on next. And these projects are collecting dust. Maybe I will reapproach them at some point, but definitely I will make them smaller.
Thank you so much for your time. It's been great talking to you.
Thank you for having me.
And that's how the interview went down. I want to thank you so much for listening to today's episode. If you want to keep up to date with the new episodes, follow us on whatever platform you're on, or follow us on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok at Game Design Hour. Dorfromantik is a beautiful and relaxing landscape town building game. The game is currently out on Steam, so make sure to go and check it out. Our sponsor, Hoffman's Woodstuffs, specializes in the design and fabrication of custom furniture made from reclaimed or sustainably sourced hardwoods. You can find them on Instagram at Hoffman's Woodstuffs or using the link in the description. If you want 20% off your next order, make sure to use code GDH20 at checkout. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you next time.